Hey guys, it's Casey and welcome back. I believe I had to look after the last video. It looks like we're on part 15 now. In the last video, we set up some additional shooting types. We set up our data table in our struct to handle, if I scroll down here, we did some different attack types and we set up splash. We did not get time to set up the instant projectile, so that's what we're going to set up now. And in that last video, we set up our old chair tower to now shoot an instant projectile. So what I want to do is I want to go inside of our tower, and now off of this, this is our shooting code here, this is our shooting event, and off of our switch on attack type, we made our homing projectile and our non-homing projectile use that same projectile, and that's okay. But now our instant, with that, we don't want to shoot a projectile, if that makes sense. Like, we just want in... sorry about that. What we want to happen is we want basically some smoke effects to happen from our tower, like some shooting effects right here. Or is this what it is right here, this spawn emitter? We basically want to do that with our shooting particles. We want our enemy to take instant damage, and we want the impact particles to play, and we basically want to deal our damage without a projectile. So let's set that up. So off of instant, what we want to do is we want to apply damage, or let's see, is it apply damage? I guess, yeah, we can do apply damage. So what we want to do is we want to apply damage, and I guess this is going to be for instant damage if we're not doing splash. I guess I'm not going to really worry too much about setting up the splash damage. If you want to make it so that your instant projectiles can also do splash, I would just handle it like we did inside the tower projectile. I would just do a branch. You can basically maybe even just copy paste this code if you wanted to. I guess that would be a reasonable way to do it. You could just basically copy paste this over if you wanted to, and we could take this, we could put this over here also, and we could say, hey, should our instant damage also do splash? I guess we can do that. We can take our splash, we can do this, and then we could basically handle it just like we did over there if we also want to handle splash damage. I'm just going to set up basic damage. I'll leave it up to you. I think that would be a good learning experience to also set it over here. But once again, it's just straightforward. If we're doing instant attack, we just want to do instant damage. Well, what damage are we doing? It's going to be this damage amount. Who are we damaging? Well, it's going to be our target. Is it called our tower target? Yes, it is. So that would be our target. Our damage causer would be ourself. And that's the instant damage. And then from there, I think we could just hook this up right here into our spawn emitter and play sound and stuff like that. If we wanted to also have a damage effect at our target, what we could do is we could spawn emitter at location, and we could apply this to our target. So we would say, what location? Well, let's get the actor location of our target. We could plug that in there. Well, what emitter do we want? It could be like an explosion effect. That's all fine. And then from here, we could just plug that in. So now, what would happen is that on our chair, it's instantly going to do its damage to its target. It's going to instantly do the damage effect at the target, and it's also going to spawn the emitter and play the sound, just like our projectiles would. So basically, we're just going around our projectile and just going straight to our enemy and doing our damage. So if we wanted to, we could play it, and I believe, do we have enough money at the start for our chair? No, we do not. So we're just going to set up a bush tower. We're going to hit spawn, and let's see. I believe we should get enough money. We might actually have to make 2 of them. Let's see. That should, after we clear out 1 wave, it should give us enough money to do our chair. And we should be able to then go over here, do our chair tower. We'll just set it right at the start over here. And now it should, yep, you see how it's just instantly doing explosions and there's no projectile? We can see we have our shooting effect and we have our impact effect instantly happening, which is that explosion. So that's how we can just set up instant projectiles. It's basically just like that. You don't want anything traveling in the air. You just want your tower to like blip and then maybe some like shocking effect to happen on your enemy to show you're dealing damage. So that's how we can handle instant projectiles. And once again, if you also want to deal splash damage here, I would really just do a branch off the end, and basically you would just end up almost copy pasting this code, essentially, is what you would be doing. So that's how you can do that. What else I want to set up in this video is we haven't really touched how to customize the visuals of our projectile. I never touched that in the previous videos because I thought it was pretty straightforward because it's essentially the same way that we handle our tower. But I guess I want to hit on one maybe special thing that we can do. So if we wanted to, we could go into like our tower struct and we could say, okay, we could make a new static mesh variable and we could call this our projectile mesh. We could make a new particle effect that is on top of our projectile, and this could just be like our flying projectile. So when our projectile's in the air, there's like smoke coming off of it or some type of particle. We could do that. But the thing is that if we made a new projectile, kind of the variables inside of our tower struct, that means that in all of our towers, we would have to be setting up all of those different particle effects and all of those different projectiles. If for example, you want all of your towers to shoot unique projectiles, then that is perfectly okay. That's what you have to do, right? If you want uniqueness with every one of your towers with what they're shooting, this is how you would do it, because each tower needs to have their own unique data. But let's say maybe you had a game where you had like fire towers and ice towers and lightning towers. Maybe on your ice towers, maybe you have like 15 ice towers, and maybe there's only like 4 ice projectiles, and maybe a lot of your towers share the same exact projectile. Well, if you ended up doing it here where each tower needed its projectile data inputted, you're going to be repeating a lot of data, right? If it was the same projectile with 2 towers, you'd be putting in the same exact information of the projectile. So one thing that we could potentially do is that we could make a new struct if we wanted to. Once again, this is if you want to reuse projectiles without having to repunch in the same data. We could make a new struct. We could call this like our projectile struct. And inside of this, we could, even if we wanted to, we might be able to move over some of these old projectile data potentially over, maybe like our splash damage, but I think you could even leave that different from the projectile. Let's see, I guess I wouldn't really copy anything over. I think everything I would probably keep here, but inside of this projectile struct, we could make a variable for our static mesh, and we could call this the projectile mesh. We could make a new particle effect. Let's see, particle system, and we could call this our projectile particle. We could make an audio so that while it's like going through the air, maybe it's like making a whooshing sound, or maybe it's making like an electrical sound like while it's flying through the air. So we could do a sound cue, and we could call this like our projectile audio. And once again, this is all up to you, but the purpose of doing it like this is that now if we wanted to, we could create a new data table, which would be under miscellaneous and data table, and we could choose our projectile struct, and now we can have our projectile data table. And inside of this, what we could essentially do is that we could make some projectiles. The first one, we could call it like our ice projectile. And then with all this, we could set our mesh, we could like make it a cone, we could make it have like fire following it, and we could give it some type of audio if we wanted to. We could go to our second projectile and we could call this like our fire. Actually, let's just call it ice and fire. Let me not write projectile in there. Then we could call this one fire. And with this, like, we could select like a square, or actually we could make it even like a circle if we wanted to. We could make this one be fire. I guess our ice, maybe it's sparks, or I don't know. This is just an example. And then basically what we would do is that we would now go back into our tower struct, and now we just need to reference the name of our projectile. And what we would do is we would make a new variable, we would make this just a name class, and we would call this our projectile. And now what we can do is, if I move this up just for some clarity, now what we can do inside of our tower data table is that I could go to my bush, and now I have my projectile here, and I could type in fire. I could go inside of my couch, and I could punch in ice. And then it's very simple from here. It's just like we've been using data tables this entire time, is that when we go to shoot, or at the initialization, that might be a good time to do it. So under tower init, so when we first spawn our tower, what we can do is we could grab out of it our projectile. So from our tower struct, we could take our projectile and we could get our data table row. So get data table row, and we're getting the data table row of the name of that projectile. And then from here, we just need to select our projectile data table. And now what we have is we have our projectile data. And we can just promote this to a variable, and we can call this our projectile data if we wanted to. And now we have that, and I'm just going to hook up not found because I didn't hook up projectiles for some of them. And then basically when we go to shoot, what we could do is inside of our projectile, we could feed in this data. Is kind of the point being, is that I don't think I want to really hook this up too much, but if we wanted to, we could like set the static mesh of our projectile. And now since we have our projectile data stored, what we can do is we can just break it and we could plug in that mesh. So that's all I think I'm going to set up. if you wanted to set up, for example, like the particle effects or the audio, what you would do is inside of the projectile, if we find that, what we could do is we could just add a particle system if we wanted to. And what we could do is basically we could set the particle of this just like we're doing the static mesh. So you would just set the particle, or I forget exactly what the right name of that is. Set template maybe. Yeah, set template I guess is what it's called. You could do that with audio. You could add an audio component to this. And that's just basically, it's up to you how much complexity do you want in your projectiles. And then if you want to reuse your projectiles across multiple towers, you just want to set up a separate data table for your projectiles. And that what you do is you just then reference inside of your tower structure the name of that projectile. And then inside of our tower, we're just getting that data for that projectile and storing it. And that when we spawn our projectiles, we can then feed in that data. So let's see if that works real quick. So I believe our bush should now shoot a cone, or actually no, the bush should shoot the sphere, right? So our bush shoots the fire projectile, and our chair, or no, we set it up to be the couch, shoots the ice projectile. So bush will shoot, I'm a little lost, here we go. Bush will shoot a sphere, and the couch will shoot a cone. Let's see if we set that up right. So if we start it up, we build our bush, let's see, what does he shoot? He shoots a sphere. It's a little hard to see, but that is a sphere. And if we replayed this and we built our couch should now shoot a cone. There we go. So that's how we can basically, we can change, just, it's really this easy. I think this is probably pretty straightforward now if you've gone through all the other tutorial parts. And that setting up this extra functionality of just saying this is what I want my particle effect to be, this is what I want the mesh to be, we can just set it up inside these data tables. And I guess the little difference of why I showed it again here is that if we plan on reusing things, like if we plan on reusing a bunch of these projectiles across multiple towers, we can store it inside of a separate data table, and instead of repeating the data over and over and over inside this table, we just need to feed it in a name that is inside of this, like we did ice and fire and fire. So I'd say that's pretty straightforward. I think I very well may be out of ideas at this point for extra stuff to add to the series. If I think of more, I will definitely make some more short videos. If you have anything that I didn't touch that you want me to touch, please put it in the comments, and I'd be glad to cover it. If there's anything that you're unsure about, I would really ask me a question. Or if it's something that maybe it's something small, or maybe it's something that you want to try and figure out on your own, try it. Try to figure out how to add some extra functionality that maybe I haven't gone over, and if you get stuck, feel free to ask. I'll be glad to help point you in the right direction. You don't necessarily need an entire video for that, and I really hope that I've shown that through the data table system, it's really easy to set up kind of extra functionality and kind of go the extra step. And I guess if you want to take a big, like, mental hurdle, how we reuse projectiles here, potentially we could reuse runners, if that makes sense. I guess I don't want to go too deep into that, but if we go inside of our AI, inside of our runner data table, we merely just set up kind of like health and run speed and stuff like that in mesh. If you wanted to, you could split this up into two different data tables. You could do a spawning data table, and you could do a runner data table. Inside of the runner data table, we could store the names of the runners, right? We could store like Rabbit, or we could store Boss 1, or we could store like Heavy Runner 2, or whatever it might be. And that what we would store inside of our spawner table is just the amount of enemies we spawn, which enemies we spawn, how fast we spawn them, stuff like that. But then what our spawner table would do is, instead of as it is now where it holds like the health and stuff of the runners, we could just say in our spawner table, we want 5 fast rabbits, we want 1 heavy boss, we want 2, and then, right? And then as we did in our tower data table where we just feed a name for our projectile, we could do the same thing inside of our spawner data table and just feed names of runners and spawn our runners that way, so that we could reuse runners and their information across multiple levels. So that's just basically how you would set that up. I hope that wasn't too confusing. But I think that'll be it for this video. It was pretty short, not too much I wanted to show off there, but I really think that this was a good foundation for you guys. In hindsight, there's maybe a few things that I would probably do differently in hindsight. I think with my runner, I would probably end up splitting that runner data table and the spawner data table in two, and then instead of storing all of our variables separately inside of our runner like we did, and it was kind of annoying, inside of our spawner to then set all of our variables when we spawned our runner, what I would probably do is I would probably just once again store that inside of a separate struct. Store our spawner data and our runner data inside of separate structs, so that here we would just save this runner struct straight into our runner, so that whenever we added new variables, they're automatically updated. I think this was sort of a mistake here. I kind of regret doing it this way. I guess it is important to know that you don't necessarily have to store all the data at once. You don't have to necessarily put it in structs. Some of my games, I actually avoid using structs, because when you go to package your game, there's a way to nativize blueprints, and it helps convert them to C++ so that they run faster. As of now, I don't know if they've updated it, but if you use structs inside of a blueprint, I believe Unreal refuses to nativize it. So if you want to nativize your blueprints, I don't believe you can use structs inside of, or blueprint defined structs inside of blueprints and nativize them. I believe there is an issue with that. They might fix that in the future, but that's just something to know. It's not that big of a deal, but there is drawbacks to using structs sometimes, or at least blueprint defined structs. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. I don't think there's too much that I would really change. It's more just personal preference stuff, probably. But yeah, once again, if you guys have any questions, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to answer them, and I really hope that this tutorial worked out for you guys. So I guess I'll see you guys in another tutorial.